You turn it up a little bit. I love this song. Rest assured, no one ever thinks they're cured. Just a minute while I reinvent myself, make it up and then I take it off the shelf. Oh, the laws of life, oh, the moon by midnight. Let's do it all this time. Everyone wishing where we go, and everyone knows. Okay, we're gonna bring it down. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Wednesday, and good morning to Liz Live. And my beautiful producer, Tara Lee, is on, and Jeremy Wick. Good morning, you guys. Happy Wednesday, and happy Wednesday, Instagram. Maybe not the happiest of topics, but something that I find really interesting as a therapist. That, you know, everyone who comes to me is suffering, everybody, unfortunately, or else they would never come into my office. And, you know, people are suffering from all kinds of things. When they come to therapy, it could be relationship issues. It can be, you know, just an interpersonal, question that they need help figuring out. It could be a death of a loved one. It could be just a million things that we all go through in the human experience as to why people will come to therapy. And just as there's many reasons that people suffer, and there's very many different kinds of suffering, as a therapist, people come to me to lift the suffering in some way, either through a solution to a problem, or to gain a new perspective, or to somehow relieve the suffering, or teach people how to relieve their own suffering. And it's not an easy task. And so you can have all the skills in the world as a therapist, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily have all the answers. And so I'm always questioning the human experience and the human suffering, and why do we suffer, and do we have to suffer in order to grow interpersonally? Because another point of therapy, God willing, at least in my therapy, is to help people to grow. And why is growth important? Because without growth, there's no change. And if there's no change, life is can be very meaningless. And I believe that it's part of the human purpose to be in a state of growth and change. It's very, very important. So all of these big issues are things that I have to deal with on a regular basis as a therapist. And they don't go away, and they don't necessarily teach you in school how to answer these huge philosophical questions. These are things that, you know, I really had to figure out. Well, I didn't figure anything out. Let me say that. These are things I have to ponder every day in order to be a good therapist, in order to help people make sense of their suffering, and help people get some relief from their suffering. So I'm always being challenged to figure all those things out. And so I wanted to share some of the thoughts and conclusions and things that I've come up with you about human suffering, and what we can do about it, and how we can best understand it. And before I do that, and I'm going to do that in just a moment, I want to talk about two things. One is I would like to ask my nephew Zach if he could maybe, you know, Coors and Surrey, I don't know what they're doing out there. I don't know if they want to come in and be a part of the show, or, you know, I'm not sure what's going on there, but they're making some noise, and so we need to see what's going on with that. So thank you, nephew Zach. And okay, so while he's doing that, so that was number one. Number two is I'm wondering if anyone saw my post that we're going to make some changes here at Liz Live. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving the show to YouTube, and you'll still be able to find the link on Facebook every day, and you'll still be able to find the link on Instagram. But until I get 1,000 subscribers, the Liz Live show is going to not be live. It's going to be pre-recorded, and I'm expecting that to just be for hopefully a few weeks. But I'm still going to do some quick live videos for Facebook and Instagram. Just pop in, pop out at various times of the week and the day, but still doing a show Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So the only thing that's changing is until we get those 1,000 views, 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, it's going to be not live, but it's still going to be called Liz Live because we're going to get those 1,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. That's the rule of YouTube, is that you cannot go live from YouTube until you have 1,000 viewers. So we have to push for that. And please get as many people as to go and go to YouTube and hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel. And all you have to do is type in hashtag talk show therapy on YouTube, or Liz Live, or you can type in the Elizabeth 126, and that will take you directly to my YouTube channel. And all you have to do is hit subscribe. And so we're taking Liz Live to the next level. And so please do that, and ask your friends when you're out, like, hey, can you go to Liz's channel and just subscribe. Tell everyone you know. Okay, so now that all of the housekeeping's out of the way, let's get into this talk about human suffering. First of all, I think we need to define suffering, because I was talking with a friend of mine this morning, and he was like, I don't get the question. I said, the question is, do we need to suffer to realize life? And, maybe the way it was worded, it didn't really make sense. So I want to clear that up and really clarify what I'm talking about. And, we all always ask the question, why is this happening? Why do children have to suffer? Why do people we love have to suffer? Why do we have to suffer through all the different things that we go through in life? And I think this is a question that every religion tries to tackle. And so when I was doing a little research and thinking about, okay, how am I going to approach this topic? I had to look a little bit at religion and just see what they're saying about it. And so I went sort of down the Buddhist road, and a little bit through the Judaic road, because I'm a Jewish, so it was kind of natural and easier for me. And so I want to share just basics of what those two religions, what they say about suffering, and then we're going to take it into more of a therapeutic lens. And, we're going to talk about and share some of the things that, we may be suffering from, and how, what we can do about that. Because again, my job, I feel in a large way, and even through the show, is to alleviate suffering. And that's a tall call of duty. And so I'm always open to learning and taking in other perspectives of how I can help people, not suffer. Who wants to suffer? Okay. So suffering, the actual word suffering, okay, it's a state of undergoing distress, hardship, struggle, and that can be physical. It can be physical pain. It could be psychological pain, emotional pain. It's some sort of discomfort, distress, right? And we've all suffered, right? And it can be, I'm suffering from, a headache, or it can be, I'm suffering from the loss of a loved one, or it could be, I'm suffering because I feel alone. I'm suffering because I'm dealing with, major health issues. I'm suffering because I'm going through a divorce. I'm suffering because I'm having financial problems, right? And so the word suffering, it's such a strong word, but it really is just a word for describing distress and strain and struggle in life that we all go through. And so, of course, And I see Benny has a good, Benny P912 is saying pain helps set understanding and or clarity of boundaries limits. That's a brilliant statement. And I have that in my notes to talk about. So thank you, Benny. You're way ahead of me, but thank you. So we're going to get to her point in a minute. So, so the question that I'm always asking, so we understand what suffering is. It's some kind of discomfort, pain, distress that we are experience. It's an experience, and it can be physical, emotional, both. And like I said, financial, relational, all these things. And we all go through it. I don't know anybody in this world who hasn't suffered a little bit. Okay. And as a Jew, Jews, they're sort of like, in the culture, it's like, oh, we have to suffer. We're martyrs, the Jewish guilt, right? And we're suffering, we suffer for our children. We suffer for the world. We're sufferers, we are. Jews are sufferers. And, I thought, does Judaism really speak to it? Does Buddhism really speak to, like, what are the religions saying about it? And what I found was kind of interesting, things I really didn't know, is that, pretty much all philosophy and all religion sees suffering as a natural part of life. It's part of human existence. So no matter what philosophy or religion that you subscribe to or that you believe in, or maybe you just don't believe in any, it's irrelevant. I think that we all understand that suffering, human suffering, the struggle, the distress, the pain, emotional, psychological, and then some, is a natural part of life. It's a part of being alive, and it's a part of being in existence. And none of us escape it, and none of us will not suffer at some point in our lives. And I doubt anyone in my age group, which is basically most of my viewers, which is, 45 and up, by the time you're 45, you've suffered. You've suffered a lot of different things, right? And some of us suffer a lot more than others, but we all do it. We all go through that. And what I often ask as a therapist is, do we have to suffer? Is it a choice? Do we choose suffering? Can we choose not to suffer? Or do we have to sort of accept it, like all philosophy and religion, that it's just a part of human existence? And do we need to suffer? Is it there to teach us something? Does it do something good for us? Because how do you know joy if you don't know pain? They're a complete inverse of each other, right? It's like the yin and yang, the black and white. If you don't understand suffering and you don't understand pain, how do you ever really appreciate joy? And what can we do with our suffering? How do we make our suffering work for us? And how do we make it productive? And can we choose not to suffer? Is that possible? And we're going to explore those things today. So here's what I read a little bit, just very brief, about suffering from Judaism's viewpoint. Judaism, like, everything Jewish, is not black and white. It's, asking more questions and thinking more deeply into it. So there's so many different views on suffering in Judaism, but they see it in some way as just exactly what Benny said, that it's some sort of discipline or some sort of limit and boundary that is bestowed upon us by God. That Jews are very, they're very sure that we are really not supposed to question suffering, because we're never really going to understand why the righteous suffer, right? So what I always think of, that I'll never understand, is I think about childhood cancer, for example. And, why should children ever have to suffer at all, let alone from something so awful like cancer? Like, I can't ever come up with a reason for that. I just can't. And I could go on and on about suffering and, how horrible it is to watch people who you love suffer or to feel suffering. And I can't understand it. There's never a logical reason that someone can give me to say, oh, children get cancer because of this reason. And it's not ever going to make sense to me personally. And I don't think it'll ever make sense to any of us. So since we really can't make sense of those type of things, then I see where Judaism is coming from and saying, like, we don't question that. We just know that we see it as a part of human existence. We don't question God. And, the Jewish, and I think the Judeo-Christian belief is that, God is sort of in charge and has his reasons, and we have to accept it. We have to have some acceptance of it and not question it. And we see it as a challenge to our faith in God, to our faith. And this is, again, more so for people who really subscribe to religion. I'm not sure, whether or not it's my view or, your view, but just generally speaking, the Judeo-Christian theory is that, we don't really question it. It's part of life. And just to be human is to suffer, right? I mean, we've all heard that saying, and it's just a part of life. And Buddhism doesn't really actually see it that different. They just break it down in kind of a different theoretical orientation. So what was interesting about Buddhism that I read is they sort of, the Buddhist belief is that too, just like the Judaism, like Jews, they all believe that it is part of human existence, period, end of conversation. That, life is, suffering. It not that the whole life is suffering, but that the suffering is part of life, just like joy is a part of life, and everything and anything else. Love is a part of life. It's just a part of life. It's part of the human experience. And what I find really cool about the Buddhist idea is that the suffering comes from an unfulfilled desire. So, and it's an attachment to material things and to life itself. Okay? So, when faced with death, we suffer. When we see other people facing death, we suffer because in some ways we are attached to the idea that, hey, we're going to live a long life and we're going to get these material goods, and we work towards these goals of human construct, and that is what causes suffering. That's what causes suffering. So if we can learn to not be attached to these desires that will never be fulfilled, according to the Buddhist belief, because we can never get rid of suffering. So we're never going to be completely fulfilled. We have to understand that. And that the only way is to, I guess, sort of connect to God, a higher existence, another dimension, however you want to see it. And that's where we kind of place our suffering in the hands of sort of another, I guess, dimension or another realm. And we don't live attached to things or, outcomes that we want, because we're not always going to get those outcomes, and things do nothing for you. And I want to make sure I'm wording this properly. So in Buddhism, basic existence, suffering is part of basic existence. It has a cause and it has an end, that it's temporary. And then I believe that when we die, they see death as, a relief of suffering. Okay. And they believe there's a root of suffering, and the craving of pleasure, material goods, and immortality can never be fulfilled. So craving pleasure, material goods, and immortality can never be fulfilled. Therefore, we suffer. The word, and I may be pronouncing this right or wrong, dukkha, D-U-K-K-A, is the unsatisfactory suffering of life, that we're never really satisfied. And then there's dukkha sankhara, which is the suffering of change, which we all go through. And then there's just, oh no, excuse me, that's the viparinama dukkha is suffering of change, and sankhara is suffering of existence. And so there are things that, and that is suffering through birth and death. So I know these things seem so existential and weird, so I want to break it down so it's easy to understand. But I think basically both of these religions are saying that suffering is just part of life. Don't try to get out of suffering, but we can understand the root of our suffering, what causes us to suffer. And maybe that's where good therapy can come in, and say, okay, we're suffering, we're suffering because of our expectation. We're suffering because we expect to live forever. We're suffering because we're defining ourselves through things, material goods, relationships, instead of our connection to God and connection to ourselves, or connection to a higher, I shouldn't say God, but to another, a higher spiritual realm. Okay. And I think where therapy comes in is asking the question, what is, just like Buddhism asks, what is the root of our suffering beyond just human existence, beyond just being alive? And is there anything we can do about that? Is there anything we can do about our suffering? And is it a choice? And are we actually allowed to, is there a way that as human beings, we can choose not to suffer? And I certainly don't have those answers, but I'm certainly trying to figure it out. So I'm going to, talk about, where I've come to, and through being a therapist and my own experiences. So of course I've suffered, I've suffered from Jewish guilt. I've suffered from the pain of losing people. I've suffered through, being betrayed by family members. I've suffered great loss, and I've suffered through just watching. I suffer a lot through my empathy of other people. When people I love, or really anybody, is in pain or suffering, I sort of suffer too. I feel for it, and so I have to really watch how deep I let my empathy go, because I can really get into trouble. So I have to really put good boundaries around, my deep sense of empathy. And I learned that in graduate school, and I'm still learning to do that, to boundary my empathy. And I think we all have to boundary our empathy, because sometimes feeling for other people too much and getting too involved in their lives and too involved in someone else's pain brings pain to us. And then there's two people suffering, and nobody ever gets better because you feel bad for them. So feeling bad for people isn't really helpful, right? I mean, what does that do? Nothing. So I think in that way we can choose, when we are seeing suffering and we're feeling suffering for others. That's a beautiful thing, but we can also say, okay, I see it, I feel it, but now I'm going to choose to see what can I do about that suffering, if anything, and see how me staying in a good place and sharing love and light and, kind of positive feelings, or, thoughts or emotions, can help this situation, rather than doom and gloom and be sad. And I think that's a choice. I'm not saying it's an easy choice to make. And if you have Jewish guilt, you're going to feel really bad, because, you're supposed to feel bad for everybody. And, that actually is not helpful, really. Feeling with somebody or understanding someone else's suffering, of course, is critical to the human experience. But we don't actually have to jump into that pain with other people in order to help them, or to be there for them, or to, help them get out of their pain. And that's a very important lesson that I had to learn. And I think it's a lesson that we could all learn from, because we all love other people. We love our children. We don't want to see them suffer. We love our parents. We don't want to see them suffer. We love our grandchildren, our animals, our friends, and most decent people don't want to see other people in pain. We feel for that. And so we have to boundary that, and we can choose to say, okay, am I going to just feel miserable and sad and sorry and bury myself, under the covers because, my best friend is going through something? That to me is a bad choice because it's not helping anyone. It's not going to help anyone. I think we can face those feelings and sit with them, but I don't think it's helpful to other people. And so that, in that regard, we can really control our suffering. But when it's our own experience and we're actually feeling in our physical body emotional pain, which, by the way, emotional pain is felt biologically. That's how we know that we're in pain psychologically. If we have a broken heart, we feel pain, we feel anxiousness, we feel uneasiness. We know that the line between physical and emotional pain isn't huge. It's really not. Pain is pain, and pain is suffering, right? So can we choose to not be in our suffering? My answer as a therapist is no. I don't believe that we can just turn off our pain and our sadness, nor do I think we should, because our emotional system is there for a reason, and our pain, in my mind, in my understanding, in my world, is a teacher. Your pain is the greatest teacher. And therefore, pain and suffering teaches us so damn much about ourselves, about our bodies, about our emotions. And if we didn't have pain and suffering on some level, we would be almost robotic. I think we, as humans, we would be robotic. We would not, relationships would be odd. We really couldn't have them. Because remember, joy and bliss are emotions as well. So you can't just shut one thing off and keep one thing on. You either allow yourself to feel things or you don't. And you can't really pick and choose. It doesn't really work like that. I don't think that's really possible. But I think we can choose a perspective on our suffering. We can choose, to some degree, how that suffering is going to play out for us in our own lives. And those are very important choices that you can make, I think, with a therapist. And so let's take for example, and I've done shows that have touched on this before, maybe not so directly, but why do good things happen to bad people? And, how do we understand the meaning of life and all of those existential questions that as a therapist, therapists must explore and study these questions, because they are the basic question of our clients. So we have to always be reading and looking and stimulating our intellect and understanding, the meaning of all of these things. And if we don't see pain as a teacher, if we don't see pain and suffering as a teacher to some degree, I think you're missing the point. I think you're missing the whole point. Again, not to question why, not to question, what's God's point here? Why do little children have cancer? That's something that is way beyond, certainly way above me. I could never come up with an answer for that one. But I do try to help people make some sense of their own personal suffering to the best degree that I possibly can. And I think we have some choice in the matter, and in some ways I think we don't. And I think that choosing to ignore your pain and suffering is also a mistake. And that's a mistake I've done so many times, because I'm an optimist. I am a natural optimist. And so, that doesn't bother me, or I let it roll off my back. But then sometimes I'm not really being authentic with myself, and I'm not really being truthful. And I am really suffering over a situation. And sometimes I've learned lately, let's just face it. Let's just sit in it. Let's just be miserable for a second. What's the big deal, right? It's temporary. It won't be forever. And I do believe that suffering is a very temporary situation, and that's also the Buddhist belief that it's temporary. It's not forever. Nothing is forever. Nothing is eternal but the human soul, right? So I'm probably getting way too far off on that. But pulling it back to humanity, pulling it back to our experiences of life, we can choose how we live out the suffering in our own lives. We can choose how we respond to suffering in others' lives. And we can boundary that suffering and that pain. And we can look at it and reflect, which is critical. Because if you don't reflect on your suffering and pain, you're sleeping. You're sleeping. You have to open those eyes and say, what is this all about for me? And that is a question I ask all my clients when they're going through hardship. I say, okay, hey, what are you learning about yourself as a result of the suffering? How are you growing and how are you changing as a result of this suffering in your life? And a lot of times people, they don't want to answer that question because they're so angry that they'd rather just, there's no reason, there's no point, and I don't want to answer this question because it's stupid. And I'm like, okay, we're not ready to go there yet. We're not ready to make sense of everything. But we do need to have that consciousness about the suffering that we're experiencing in order to survive it and in order to fight through it and in order to not keep getting taught the same lesson over and over and over again, because that's no fun. And I've seen that happen. So for example, I see clients that have the same argument, with their kids over and over and over again, the same argument with their husband over and over and over again, and they're not getting the message. They're not getting what they're supposed to learn from it. And it just keeps happening and the behavior doesn't change and it just keeps happening. So we must pause and understand the suffering and question how it's benefiting us, no matter how horrible and horrid it is. Very important to do in therapy or just in life if you never go to therapy, to do that, to not question the universe in a sense of, we'll never, like the Jews say, and I agree, that we'll never really get it. So isn't it better to just accept that suffering is a part of humanity? It's a part of the human experience and a part of life, rather than constantly fighting it and being angry about it. And if we feel like there's injustice in the world, take action that you can, that's reasonable. And that also helps relieve suffering. When you feel like, okay, there's something I can do about this, you don't feel so helpless. That's another way we suffer. But I think we need to look in the mirror and ask, what is the point of this suffering? What does this mean for me? And what am I getting from this experience? What am I being taught? How am I being challenged? How am I being pushed? How am I changing as a result of this? And I'm telling you, I've seen this in my own life. I've seen it in my client's life. When you don't do this reflection work, and you don't have to go to therapy to get the reflection work. You can do it on your own. You can do it with a friend or whatever. If you don't do a little bit of that reflection, I'm telling you, it keeps happening, keeps happening, keeps happening. And I don't know how it all works behind the scenes, but I've seen the repetitions and the patterns. And until we really wake up, and, we can, in therapy, we can call it, pattern intervention, right? Looking at patterns of thinking and behavior and intervening and changing those things so you have better consequences, better results in your life. Or we can do it more on an existential level and ask, okay, what is this suffering teaching me? What is it doing for me? What am I learning? How am I growing? How am I becoming a better human being as a result of this kind of suffering? And I'm going to see if there's a personal example that I can get. In fact, I'm sure I have them. Okay, let me see. Oh boy, we got lots of questions here. Good morning, And good morning, Thomas. Good morning and happy Wednesday, beautiful people. Hope you all have a blessed day. And remember, count your blessings, not your problems. Amen. Thomas, thank you for your wisdom. Do you believe suffering leads to a positive or happy result? Great question. And I would say that is exactly precisely the piece that lies in our hands. That's the thing we have the choice about. I don't know if we can choose, we can't really choose the suffering per se to happen or not happen, but we can work really hard and fight really hard to make it make sense for us, have it work for us, be the greatest teacher for us, and to grow and have a more joyful existence because of it. If that makes any sense. So it can be. I think it's up to you. It can have a really bad result too. I think I've seen a lot of that too. Why is pain and suffering usually associated with God? Ooh, good question. I don't exactly know, but I would say that when people are confused about what's happening to them, when they are in pain over what's happening in their lives and they don't know what to do or where to go or how to alleviate what's happening to them, it feels really good to blame somebody. It does. So it's God's fault, right? It's God's fault because we've been taught in this society, in this Judeo-Christian society, especially in America and Europe, that God is supposed to answer our prayers, and God is a vending machine, and we can just stick our money in and hit the button and choose what we want. And we're supposed to get it with prayer, and it just doesn't work like that. And I'm sorry for any of you who are taught that, and I'm sorry if any of you believe that, because you're being told a complete and total lie. Life doesn't work like that. I've never seen ever anything say, oh, okay, I won $1 million. Boom, here it goes. Oh, I really want a good job. Here you go. No, you have to work for it. You have to push and work, and you have to work for peace, actually. You have to work for inner peace. It doesn't necessarily just come, but I don't know that it has to be a struggle, but I think we have to struggle in order to get to that place, if that makes any sense. But I think we associate it with God as like this, there's some higher power pulling the strings on all of our lives. And so if something goes wrong, we know who to blame. We can blame God. But actually, I think that's so unfair. And I think that most of the time it's either our fault, or if something happens like, like a health crisis or death or something like that happens to us, that's of course nobody's fault, right? It's not your fault that you get cancer or your fault that you get, whatever disease. That's not no one's fault. That's nobody's fault. It's someone's fault when someone in your life dies, right? Those are things that we are completely out of control of. So since we know that intellectually, well, I don't have any control over that stuff, then it must come from God or this higher power, and therefore I can also blame God when it doesn't go my way. But I think that is a death trap for someone who thinks like that. Because again, going back to the Jewish and the Buddhist belief systems that are kind of interesting on the matter, we aren't meant to understand everything. We're just not. It's beyond us. And the suffering is part of human existence, and it will always be there. And as the therapist, I'm saying I agree. I agree that I don't understand so many of the horrible things that happen in life, that I don't even really try anymore so much. But I just try to say what lessons can be learned from this tragedy, what lessons can be learned from this crisis, or how am I going to reflect on this painful experience and how can I be better from it? How can I evolve, grow, be kinder, be whatever, and help other people through this experience? And if you don't do that reflection and you don't do that work, you're going to think life really sucks. You're going to have absolutely nothing's going to make sense to you. And that's why I think we shouldn't try to make sense of it. It just, some things just are, and we should just leave it alone and know that, we're not going to understand childhood cancer. We're not going to understand why good people suffer. We're just never going to get that. It's not as long as we're alive. I don't think so. And to try to do that is like banging your head on the wall. There isn't an answer. What can we do when watching our loved ones suffer? Well, I've been in that spot many times. And, I can only share what I did. I don't know if it will work for other people. But I always think about my mother's death and how she suffered from lung and brain cancer. And of course, certainly didn't deserve to suffer. And she made it. I'm staring at this picture of her in front of me. I'm looking at her beautiful face and I'm thinking, so unfair, so unfair that such a good woman, had to go through that. And I've never tried to ask why, because why not? I mean, it could happen to anybody. It could happen to me. It could happen to you. It could happen to anyone. So I try not to go there and say why. But when she was suffering, I tried very hard just to be there for her and to let her know that she wasn't alone and that we were a team and that we were going to get through this together. And that whatever we needed to do, we would do. And that whatever I needed to do to help her through this, I was willing to do that. And I did. And I'm so grateful for that experience. And so if you have someone in your life that is not well or that, may have a short existence, if you can be there for them in that really involved way, like the way that I was with my mom, which was, her daily care, then I would say do it. I have a lot of clients who have done it and no one ever regrets it. But if that's not for you or that person is not allowing you to come in that close or that deep, because a lot of people push people away when they're very ill or they're suffering. They don't, whether it's mental, physical, whatever, when people are depressed, they don't answer the phone. They don't go out anywhere. They don't want to be around people. And so you can't really push that because you're just going to get resistance. And I think that if it's a physical ailment, like a cancer or, a disease, a heart disease, whatever, there's so many diseases out there, but God, it'd be anything. I think you have to first ask that person who's suffering what they need, because we sometimes make other people's suffering about us, right? And how could they do this to me? Especially with drug and alcoholism or suicide or things like that. The first one, how could it be so selfish? How could they do this to me? And it's not about you. It's their journey, and people's death is their journey. People's suffering is their journey. It's not yours. It's not mine. I remember when my grandmother was dying, that was like 20 years ago, and had just moved down to Florida. And I was sitting on a board of the Victim Services Center of Miami. I was the board president. And the woman who ran the therapy center, it was free therapy for victims of violent crime, violent incidences. And so the woman who ran it was a therapist, and I took the first plane home. My grandmother, went into she was totally fine. I mean, she was older, she's 87, but she was fine, totally independent, totally fine. And then she had a knee replacement and she just went unconscious. in rehab. And what we came to find out is that she had a golf ball sized brain tumor that had been possibly growing for 30 years. The doctor said that we had no idea. She had like no symptoms. And so I was very close to her, and I was very upset, and I took the first plane back to Pittsburgh to be with her in the hospital and be with my mom and my brother and my cousins. We all loved her so much, and we were kind of, she was 87, but we were sort of surprised. So I was so distraught, and I remember this woman from Victim Services Center saying to me, "Don't be selfish. Let her go. This is not your death, this is hers." And it really struck me so that I'm saying it 20 years later on this vodcast. And I remember her saying that to me, and it really woke me up. And I was like, okay. And I was only 25 at the time, or 26. And I didn't, I was too young to understand, because I just wanted my grandmother to live. That's all I could think. I just want my grandmother. That's all I wanted. And so to hear someone say to me, "Elizabeth, her death is not yours," really, really woke me up. And wow, she's right. She's right. And so I approached my grandmother's death with so much more peace than I did my grandfather's death. And I could go on, because of what she said to me. And I realized that my grandmother was suffering. She was never going to come back from, at 87 from a golf ball sized brain tumor. So why would I want her to suffer? What, just because I want her to be around? That's not fair. So I learned from that experience, and I saw it so differently than I ever saw the death of anyone else in my family, that it would be selfish of me to try to keep her alive just for me, just so I could have her. And, I learned, and I'm so glad we all made the decision as a family that we were going to, remove the breathing tubes and let her go peacefully. And I feel so good about that decision. But I couldn't have made that decision at that age alone. No way. And so I think that we have to really remember that, what are other people's boundaries? And it's hard. It's really hard, because we want to jump in and we want to caretake and we want to do, we want to save and we want to make them happy. And sometimes we can't. And sometimes people don't want it. People want to die with dignity. They want to suffer with dignity. And you have to respect their wishes, because it's not about you. It's about them. And yes, you're a part of that because you're in a relationship with that person who's suffering, and you want to change things and you want to make things different for them, but it's impossible. So especially if they're saying no, especially if they're saying stay away from me, that's heartbreaking. When you love somebody, it's heartbreaking. But we can say, okay, they're suffering and they don't want me too close. So what can I do? And I think we can ask people when they're suffering, what can I do, if anything? And I get all kinds of answers from friends, family, clients, what can I do for you? Some people want me to, sit with them and hold their hands, literally. Some people, want me really far away. You have to ask people what they want. What do they need in that time of suffering? And everybody is different. And we have to remember that other people's suffering does not belong to us. Not psychologically, not emotionally, not physically. And that's a very difficult thing to learn. And it's very difficult to deal with that helpless feeling. But I've learned through my experiences as a therapist, and also my experiences as a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a best friend, a cousin, whatever. I've learned through all these friends, best friends, lovers, whatever. I've learned through all the many roles that I've played in my life that others' suffering is not mine, and that I can only go so far in trying to alleviate that. And you're better putting your, helpfulness or your caring into people who will accept it and want it rather than people who don't. And everyone has to sort of walk their own journey and, seek their own way through suffering. And it's very important that I think, give people the dignity and the space to be able to do that in the way that they want. And if you're lucky enough, like I was with my mom, to be able to be right there and do everything for her possible, that was such a blessing. I'm so grateful for that every day. Some of it's such peace with it. That was really, really, really lucky, because not everybody gets to do that with their loved ones, and not all of us have the makeup for that. There were different times in my life where I could never have done what I did for my mom for somebody else, or at least I thought I couldn't. And so I think it's really a gift when someone lets you in that close, but don't expect everyone to let you in that close when they're suffering. And I think using the word we will get through this is really a beautiful thing to say to someone who's suffering, so they know that, hey, I don't have to do this by myself. Let them know that you're there for them, and don't lie. If you're not going to really follow through and be there for them, don't say it. Don't give that I've heard that 100 times. Oh, if you need anything, I'll be there for you. And then you call and they're not there. I mean, so if you're sincerely ready to be there for someone, let them know. And then that's it, and walk away. See if they take you up on it. And don't take on other people's suffering as yours, because it's somebody else's human experience that you are witnessing. And sometimes just witnessing is a beautiful thing. To just witness, yes, I know this is painful. I see that you're in pain. I get it. Yes, you are, going through hell, and I see that. Sometimes that's enough. So I could probably do a whole show on how to be there. It's a great question on how to be there for somebody who's suffering. I could probably do 3 shows on it, and maybe I will. It's where a lot of my show ideas come from, is these conversations. So I watched this is a Facebook question. I watched my father suffer horribly for years, right up until his death. It was the worst time in my life. Unfortunately, I don't feel stronger for it or enlightened by it. I'm just glad his suffering ended, but mine still continues. And yes, and thank you so much for sharing that. That's I know that's part of grief. That is grieving. That's what grief is. You're suffering because you're missing somebody in your life who is very, very special. And I don't think there's a time limit on grief. And I think that's okay. It's okay if you're still suffering. I mean, when you watch someone you love suffer, it's hard to get over that. It really is. Very traumatizing. It's very traumatizing. And when you're a very empathetic person, that meaning you really, really feel for other people, which some of us do a lot more than others, then the grief is even harder. And I think grief is love. So the grief that you feel is equal to the love that you feel for that person. So if you're still suffering, that tells me you really, really, really loved your father. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful feeling to love somebody that much. So I think that the suffering is just the love. The grief is the love. And one day, I think you won't continue to suffer, but I don't know when that's going to be. And again, everything we're talking about today is, these big philosophical questions of, is suffering a matter of choice? Can I choose, to suffer or not to suffer? And these are just questions. There's no answers to them. I think that we can choose our response to suffering, but I don't know that we can choose this or choose to suffer or not. I don't know, but I think we can choose how we respond to it and our perspective of it. And I'm glad that your father is no longer suffering. And I would say to anyone out there who, is grieving the loss of a special somebody, a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, a child, we don't get over these losses. So don't try to get over things because it doesn't happen. You learn to live without this person. You learn to smile again without this person. You learn to go on, but you don't get over the fact that they're gone. You don't get over the fact that they died, and you definitely aren't going to get over the fact that they suffered. That you just can't do it. It's not possible unless you're just a sociopath and you can just, completely block things out. But I think that you can learn how to live in a different way. And I think, one thing I try to do in terms of my parents' death is I try to, and my grandparents and everyone that I loved, is I try to think about how can I best honor them in the life that I do have now. What is it that they would want for me? If they were in the room, would they say, yes, Elizabeth, keep suffering forever that I died, mourn me forever? And I know they wouldn't. In fact, my mother said to me before she died, I was crying one day with her in the kitchen, and we knew what was going on, and I was just so sad. And she said, oh, Elizabeth, you'll be fine. And I said, how could you say that, Mom? I mean, you have to know my mom to understand that she would say that. But, oh, you'll be fine. You'll go on, you'll go on with your life. You'll be busy, and you'll go on without me. And I was so mad. I said, how could you say such a thing? I can't go on without you. I don't want to go on without you. But here I am almost 8 years later, and I've gone on without her. It doesn't mean that I don't think about her every day or miss her and love her and think of her. And, but you have to go on, because I think that's what she would want. She wouldn't want her daughter to be, miserable and suffering every day because she's not around. Who would want that for their child? So I want to give her the peace of knowing that I'm living without her, and I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm never gonna not miss her, but I find joy and moments. And I think we all have to, try to find the joyful moments, and don't expect every moment to be joyful, but really appreciate the joyful moments when we're in crisis and when we're suffering, and really think about what is the benefit of continuing to suffer or choosing to suffer. Is there a benefit to that? And grief can take you years. I mean, it can take 10, 15 years. It can take 5 years. It can take 20. I mean, there's no time limit. Time is, just a lie. It's nothing. But really good questions. And, what a show. Like, what a deep conversation. What a beautiful show. Thank you guys so much. Let me make sure I didn't miss any comments before I leave. No, I think that's it for Facebook. And hi everyone on Instagram. Oh, my brother's here. Hi, Carrie. My awesome brother. And hello, Robbie. And hello, Marcelo. And who else is here? Hello, Benny and Sandra. Miss you. I love you guys. And thank you so much for watching Liz Live Wednesday. And remember to please go to YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in the Elizabeth126 and you'll get right to my YouTube channel. And there's lots of videos on there that will be helpful to you. And I need your help to help more people. And I can only do that if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, because we want to go live from YouTube so we can meet a much broader audience. Okay. So I will be posting all of my Liz Live shows, probably more than likely through a YouTube link for a couple of weeks until we get live on YouTube. But I will promise to pop on live, for Mental Health Mondays, and I'm still on Facebook, and my shows are still going to be there, but they won't all be live. And like I said, the more people we get to subscribe to my channel, the sooner I'll be on live and you guys get to interact with me. If we can please get on YouTube. So tell everyone you know to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Elizabeth126 on YouTube.com. I love you guys. Have a beautiful day. And let's try to mitigate our suffering for the day. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you guys Wednesday at 11 a.m. Take care. Until then, take care.